Welcome to this deep dive. Listen, whether you are an intensely focused student gearing up for that Series 6 exam, or just someone who truly wants to master the mechanics of investing, you are exactly in the right place. Today, we are unpacking something absolutely foundational: investment companies and mutual funds. Now, I know firsthand that textbooks have a way of making this material seem incredibly dense, just packed with jargon and complex regulations. But here's the secret. It's actually a beautifully logical system once you see how all the puzzle pieces fit together. So let's dive right into this and make sure you walk away with total confidence. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll hit the types of investment companies, then move into mutual fund categories, followed by key investor documents. After that, we'll tackle buying, selling, and pricing, break down the fees and expenses, and finally wrap up with strategies for withdrawing your money. So let's kick things off with a fundamental question. How can an everyday person, someone who doesn't have millions of dollars sitting around in a bank account, get access to the exact same professional money management and massive portfolio diversification as the ultra-wealthy? I mean, it seems like a rigged game, right? Well, the answer to that question is quite literally the main reason the investment company was invented in the first place.
And that brings us to our core definition under the Investment Company Act of 1940. At its heart, an investment company is simply a business that gathers money from a huge group of everyday investors. Think of it like crowdfunding. By pulling all that money together, they have the massive buying power needed to efficiently purchase and professionally manage a huge basket of securities, like stocks and bonds, on behalf of everyone. But, and this is absolutely crucial, here is the most important rule of all. Every single investment company must have a clearly stated investment objective. They can't just take your pooled money and wing it based on what's trending. They have a highly specific goal, and legally, they must stick to it, unless a majority of the shareholders actually vote to change it.
Okay, Section 1. Let's look at the types of investment companies and their three main structures. Now, what's really interesting about this slide, and you'll want to star this if you're taking the exam, is the difference between the two main types of management companies. First, we have open-end companies, which we all commonly know as mutual funds. They are constantly, continuously creating new shares. Think of it like a club with no maximum capacity. If you want in, they magically create a new share just for you. When you want out, you redeem it directly with the fund itself, and the price is based strictly on the fund's net asset value, or NAV. Closed-end funds, on the other hand, are a totally different animal. They issue a fixed, limited number of shares only once during an initial public offering. After that, no more shares are ever created. It's like a sold-out concert. If you want to buy or sell a ticket, or a share in this case, you have to do it on the secondary stock market with other investors. That means the price isn't just about what the assets are worth, it's driven entirely by market supply and demand. Moving on to Section 2, mutual fund categories, or finding the absolute right fit for your specific life goals. The true beauty of the mutual fund industry is that there is a specific fund designed for literally any life goal you can dream up. Let's run through some really practical examples to help lock this into your memory. Say you're a younger investor. You're totally fine taking on high risk because you're chasing massive rewards over a 10 to 15-year horizon. For you, an aggressive growth fund, which invests in smaller, much more volatile companies, is your perfect match. But maybe that's not you. Let's say you're saving for a vacation home that you want to buy in, say, 7 to 10 years. You can't afford crazy volatility. You'd want a value fund. These seek out stable, undervalued companies that offer a bit more of a safety net. And finally, what if you're approaching retirement? Or maybe you just hate risk and want a steady stream of cash? Then an equity income fund is your go-to. They focus on things like utility companies that reliably and regularly pay out dividends. It's really just a matter of playing matchmaker between the fund type and your real-world goal. Now, we have to talk about an incredibly popular option today, the target date fund. Imagine an investor who plans to retire in the year 2030. They can just buy a 2030 target date fund and essentially put their investments on autopilot. Right now, because they still have a little time, the fund might be heavily invested in riskier stocks for growth. But here's the magic. As the calendar actually creeps closer to the year 2030, the fund manager automatically, behind the scenes, shifts that money out of stocks and into much safer bonds. It literally does the risk management work for you as your big target date approaches. All right, on to Section 3, key investor documents. Let's make this paperwork simple. Look, the financial industry is heavily regulated, which naturally means there is a mountain of disclosure paperwork. But you really only need to know these 4 main documents. First, the full or statutory prospectus. This is the master rulebook. It has everything you need to make a fully informed decision. Next is the summary prospectus. It's exactly what it sounds like, a much shorter plain English version that actually contains the application to buy the shares. Then we have the SAI, the Statement of Additional Information. This one is for the true finance nerds. It's totally optional, but if you want to look at the deep, granular financial balance sheets, you can request it for free. Finally, the omitting prospectus. Don't let the fancy name fool you. This is really just a basic advertisement. It doesn't have enough info for you to actually buy the fund. And here's a massive pro tip, especially for exam takers. A mutual fund prospectus must be updated every single year. And if you hand a physical copy to a client, you absolutely cannot highlight it, underline it, or alter it in any way whatsoever.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds into the actual mechanics of the market: buying, selling, and pricing.
So we know the rules and we know the funds, but how do we actually calculate what these shares are worth day to day? Well, everything in the mutual fund world revolves around the net asset value, or NAV. The map here is surprisingly straightforward. You take all the total assets the fund owns, you subtract any liabilities or debts it owes, and you are left with the total net assets. You simply divide that big number by the number of shares that exist out in the world, and boom, you have your exact price per share. But here is the catch, and it's a big one. Mutual funds use something called forward pricing. If you place an order to buy or sell at noon, you do not get the noon price. Your order just sits there and is processed at the next calculated NAV, which always happens at the close of the business day. You're buying blindly into the future price.
And this brilliantly illustrates one of the most powerful strategies you can use for buying shares. Imagine you commit to investing exactly $600 every single month, totally ignoring whatever crazy things the stock market is doing. This strategy is called dollar cost averaging. Let's look at the math. In January, the market is down and the price is cheap, just $20. So your $600 buys you a lot of shares, 30 of them. Fast forward to April. The market is hot, the price is high at $40, so your $600 naturally only buys 15 shares. Because you are automatically buying more shares when they are on sale and fewer shares when they are expensive, the math works out beautifully in your favor. In this specific scenario, the average price of the shares over those 4 months was $28.50. But because of dollar cost averaging, your actual average cost per share was only $26.67. Now, to be clear, it doesn't magically guarantee a profit, but mathematically, it absolutely lowers your average cost.
Section 5. This is a critical one for real life and the exam. Charges, fees, and expenses. Let's understand the true cost of investing. I need you to burn this exact number into your memory: 8.5%. Test topic alert. This is the absolute maximum front-end sales load, or sales charge, that FINRA rules allow a mutual fund to charge an investor. Look, managing millions of dollars requires highly trained professionals, and they charge for their work. But if you ever see a front-end load that is higher than 8.5%, somebody is breaking the rules. Thankfully, you usually don't have to pay anywhere near that maximum amount. Why? Because of a fantastic system called breakpoints, which is basically just the finance industry's version of volume discounts. Think of it like buying in bulk. If you invest under $10,000, you might pay a 5% sales fee. But the exact second your investment hits the $10,000 mark, your fee instantly drops to 4%. And here's where ethics come in. If a financial representative sees that you are about to invest, say, $9,500, they are ethically and legally obligated to stop you and say, hey, if you add just $500 more, you'll hit a breakpoint and save significantly on commissions. Failing to disclose these volume discounts to a qualifying investor is a massive, serious FINRA violation. So knowing that, how do smart investors strategize to maximize these discounts? You have 3 insider tools. First is the letter of intent, or LOI. Let's say you don't have $10,000 today, but you know for a fact you will over the next year. You sign this binding 13-month promise. The fund gives you the discount immediately, but they hold a few of your shares in escrow just in case you break your promise. Second, you have rights of accumulation. This is great. If your account naturally grows in value over time and crosses a discount threshold on its own, all your future investments automatically get that cheaper rate. And lastly, the combination privilege. You don't have to do it alone. You can literally pool your investments together with your spouse or your minor children to hit those big discount tiers much, much faster. All of this talk about fees brings us to share classes. I want you to visually memorize this contrast. Class A shares have a front-end load. That means the fee is taken out immediately before your money even enters the market. It stings up front, for sure, but it is by far the best option for large, long-term investors because they can take advantage of those breakpoint discounts we just talked about. Class B shares are the exact opposite. They use a back-end load. All your money goes to work in the market on day one, which sounds great, but if you panic and sell your shares early, you pay a giant penalty fee. The silver lining is that this penalty, the CDSC, drops a little bit every single year. Usually, after 5 to 7 years, the penalty vanishes completely, and they convert into cheaper Class A shares. So it's a simple choice: pay now upfront or pay a penalty if you leave the party early. Okay, here is another massive trap that catches people on exams and in real life. You will constantly hear mutual funds advertise themselves as no-load funds, but listen closely. No load does absolutely not mean no fees. A fund is legally allowed to market itself as a no-load fund as long as its 12b1 marketing and distribution fees do not exceed 0.25% of the fund's average net assets. It's a tiny fee, but it's still a fee.
So, the crucial point we need to establish here is understanding the overall expense ratio. The expense ratio is simply what it costs to keep the lights on at the mutual fund year after year. As you can see in the chart, it includes the investment manager's fee, administrative costs like hiring fancy lawyers and accountants, and those 12b1 marketing fees. But what does it absolutely definitively not include? It does not include the sales charges or the front-end or back-end loads we just discussed. The expense ratio is purely the ongoing day-to-day operational cost. It is completely separate from the one-time commission load you pay to actually buy or sell your way into the fund.
All right, we've made it to Section 6, the best part of the investor's journey: strategies for withdrawing money and finally enjoying your returns.
When you retire, instead of cashing out your entire account all at once and facing a massive tax bill, funds offer systematic withdrawal plans. But you have to choose your trade-off. With a fixed dollar plan, you tell the fund, send me exactly $1,000 every month. The fund will sell whatever shares it needs to in order to meet that amount. The pro? You know exactly what your check will be. The con? If the market crashes, you are selling more shares at lower prices and you could drain your account empty in just a few years. With a fixed time plan, you say, make this money last exactly 20 years. The duration is guaranteed, but your monthly check is going to fluctuate wildly depending on how the market is performing. And then there's fixed percentage, where you withdraw, say, 1% of the total value every month. Now, the golden rule for any financial rep here is simple. You can explain these options all day long, but you must never, ever guarantee a specific return or promise a client that their money will never run out.
Throughout this entire journey of pooling money and paying fees, you might be wondering, who is actually protecting the everyday investor from these fund managers? Well, that heavy responsibility falls to the fund's board of directors. And to ensure they are playing fair, the law mandates that at least 40% of the board must be non-interested members. This means they cannot have any professional or financial connection to the management company. They are independent outsiders sitting at the big table with a strict fiduciary duty to ensure your hard-earned money is being treated with the absolute highest ethical standards.
And there you have it, the vast, sometimes intimidating mechanics of investment companies and mutual funds completely decoded and simplified. We've covered everything from open and closed-end structures down to share classes and systematic withdrawals. I want to leave you with this final thought. Looking at your own life, your own risk tolerance, and your own big goals, which systematic withdrawal plan would you personally choose to secure your financial future? Take a moment to really think about that. Thank you so much for joining me in our session today. Keep studying, stay focused, and you're gonna crush it.